I'll smack the whole out your mouth before Gay Boy existed, before Mexican was my neighbor. Before Donkey Face 2015 attack, I'll smack the whole out your mouth. From before Big Show existed, I'll smack the whole out your mouth. From before Kentucky, people existed before Kentucky. People who were 14 before Kentucky, I smacked the whole out your mouth. People who existed after Kentucky, who were 14 before Kentucky, and people who existed before Kentucky, who were 14 after Kentucky, and people who were 50 before, who existed before Kentucky, who were 50 in 2004 versus people who existed after Kentucky, who were 50 in 2004 versus people who existed after Kentucky, who were 50 after Kentucky. All age groups 16, 14, 20, and 60. That's the key route to the infinity flip. And it's about to be, it's 4 minutes and it just turned 24 at 12:04. And the key is 20, 14, 16, and 60 before Kentucky, and 20, 40, 15, and 16 after Kentucky. And those people who existed before Kentucky and people who existed after Kentucky. Whether it was 14 days they existed or 14 videos. If they were already 50 before Kentucky, they were always going to be 50 after Kentucky, but they didn't exist. They were 50 before they existed. They were 50 before Kentucky, but they existed after Kentucky. And they were 15 before Kentucky, and they existed before Kentucky. And it could go the same. So I guess people trying to make connection between my life. But I said, get the fuck out my fucking game. And I guess some lesbians, wanted to attack me. Some flat-chested, bald-headed woman. And I said, get the fuck, I will smack the devil out your fucking father. You move when I fucking tell you. And I guess someone tried to say I so gangster, I will smack the whole out your mouth until you went out your face. I guess, somewhere Mexicans in Big Hershey are trying to be in secret and say they don't have a mental illness or they're not bald-headed or that there's some type of gangster that wants to be seen because someone calls them a bald-headed woman, and they try to say that Jesus favors them and try to whistleblow and say that they're set free. People who had sex when they were 14 before Kentucky, and people who had sex after Stinky Anus existed, versus people who had sex before Miss Mary existed, versus people who had sex before Rubio existed, versus people who had sex before Stinky Boots existed, and people who had sex after the Buddha Temple. People who were 14 before Bill died, people who were 14 before Hutchinson died, and people who were 14 after Elaine died. People who were 14 before I worked at Target. People who were 14 before I was in Kentucky. People who were 14 while I was in Virginia. People who were 14 after Mariano's employment. People who were 14 when I worked at Mike's job. People who were 14 when I worked at Target. People who were 14 after I worked at Target. People who were 14 before I worked at Mariano's. And then the first ride to Skokie. And Marcus buying his house with the pool. People who existed before Donkey Face. People who existed before 45, 48. people who existed before albino, people who existed before von Steuben, people who existed before new management, people who existed before Skokie, people who existed after Virginia but were still older than people who existed before von Steuben.